after a couple technical difficulties. Let's try this a third time. Compression. This video is going to be more informational than a bunch of demos, but I want you to get the concept because compression really is one of the more difficult things to hear and to do well. I think the concept is manageable. So first we have to define what dynamic range means, and that is the distance between the loudest and quietest, or the lowest and highest points of amplitude in any signal. If you think about singing, there are going to be quiet sections or loud sections. When you play the bass, sometimes you hit a note quieter or louder. Yes, some of that is intentional, but some of it's just playing. And compression allows us to kind of attenuate or push down on these louder sections or these louder points to create a more consistent signal. By doing that, we are boosting the quieter parts while quieting down the louder parts. So this is a pretty cool or good, simple image of, an uncompressed signal and then a compressed signal that's just more consistent with a narrower or a slimmer dynamic range. The common controls, and we're primarily going to be talking about the Dyne 3 compressor limiter, just because it's super simple. We'll take a look at a couple others. So any compressor is going to work on the concept or the parameter of a threshold. You have to set a threshold to essentially say, above this point, we are going to let the compressor do its thing and push down. Very similar to Maxim, if a signal does not go above the threshold, it's not doing anything. You may get a tonal shift or change, but that's mostly because it's going through the quote-unquote circuitry of the compressor, and it may add, some warmth or character, but it's not compressing. Ratio. How much compression, how the strength of the compression that is applied once the signal goes above that threshold. So a ratio of 1:1 is essentially nothing. If the signal goes above the threshold by a decibel, you get a decibel out. A 2:1, if it goes above the threshold by 2, it's going to push down by 1 and give you 1. Okay? If it goes above by 4, you're going to get 2 decibels of compression. You're going to get 2 decibels out. If it goes above by 8, you get 4 decibels out. At a ratio of 4:1, for example, if the signal goes above the threshold by 4 decibels, you're going to get 1 out. If it goes above by 8, you're going to get 2 out. So depending on what you are dealing with, based on the type of signal, based on the performance, and based on what you're trying to achieve, it would determine or inform what ratio you choose to use. Attack, how fast the compressor actually does its thing. And the best way to describe that, I think, is to look at a drum hit, for example. Something with a fast transient. Sometimes what we want to do is allow the transient through the compressor before we start to squash it, or before we start to attenuate it. But sometimes we want it to be really fast and to hit right away. So again, once the signal goes above a given threshold, how quickly do we want the compressor to act on doing its thing? Release, how long do we want the compressor to hold on to that attenuation before letting the signal go back up to normal? And again, it's all content based. The knee, best to kind of look at this in terms of the knee. So a softer ramp in terms of we're going to hit this thing and kind of gradually attenuate, not gradually, but kind of, harder or softer. It really depends on the content as well. We might want a more gradual ramp for sustained sounds. For example, this bass that I'm playing, or I'm playing you, longer vocals, pianos that are held out, but we might want a harder knee for rap vocals or something of that nature, or drums. Knee attack gain. What do we use the gain and sometimes referred to as makeup for? If you think about it, if you hit something really hard, if you attenuate it, what's happening? It's getting quieter. And what we want to do is if we make a signal quiet, we want to bring the gain up and match. We want to match our compressed volume to the volume of the signal, because we don't want our ears to be tricked into thinking that whatever is loudest is best. So I was taught always to more or less match your gain. It's some plugins now you'll see automatic gain compensation. So, quick demo. I had chosen to do this on a bass, and of course by shifting things around, I lost my demo. There it is. All right. So if we look at this bass part, you can see that there are quieter notes and louder notes. Some people are going to say never compress out of context in solo. I got to show you something. All right, so you can definitely hear right there, and you could hear it all over the place, to be honest. Nothing bad about the performance, just some louder notes and quieter notes. So what I've done is I set a fairly low threshold because I want this to be, obvious. I have a 4-to-1 ratio. I am going to have a fairly long release as well because these are so sustained. And what I did is I went to the quieter notes and I got a little bit, about 1 to 2 decibels of attenuation. I'm going to lower this again. And you can see there's more attenuation with the louder notes. Look at this one. Now it still certainly sounds more aggressive. Now if I speed up my attack, at least in theory, it should squash that more quickly. I think there's also the perception of that being louder still because of the way that the string was played. But you can tell that it is really, really much quieter. Okay, let's just raise this up. Okay, that amount of that slow attack doesn't really clamp down on the signal. This does have a low and high pass filter, but I'm not really going to get into that. So that's the general concept of compression. Let's take a look at another compressor that comes with Pro Tools, the Pro Compressor. Again, threshold ratio, knee attack release. A couple different things here. Depth. If you look at depth, I'm trying to understand it because I don't really use this very much. It essentially says, okay, we're going to let all these other parameters do its thing, but we're not really going to do as much as the compressor would normally do. So it's almost kind of like limiting how much compression after you've already set all your things. So I'm not totally sure about that. Makeup gain. So again, we talked about that. The other one was just called gain. Dry, wet mix. So there's a concept called parallel compression, and we'll talk about that separately. I do parallel compression on a separate track. This allows you to essentially mix the dry signal with the compressed signal. So for example, if you're compressing a drum, typically we'll talk about wanting to have a fairly slow attacks to allow the transient through before squashing it, because that's where the power is in a drum. and then we want to kind of compress the rest of the signal to kind of give us some sustain to the drum. Allowing the dry signal to come through gives us even more of that transient, and then we're able to kind of mix that together. I like to do that on a separate track, and I'll demonstrate that separately. But same idea. This is really, really, really crazy because I wanted to demonstrate. So if I set a crazy threshold, I want this all dry. Sorry. All wet, I should say. So my compressor, I'm compressing so much, 18 decibels, it's super quiet. My makeup gain allows me to bring that up and match it. So now I can say I don't like that compression, but at least I've taken volume difference out of the equation. Let's look at a couple others just to see the types of compressors that we have available. The BF76 is a UREI 1176 clone. This has a fixed threshold, so you don't see threshold. What you see is input. And what this does is essentially says, how much of the bass can we put into this unit before it hits the threshold that's built in? Now, it got really loud, so we need to make our adjustments. So for the most part, we're dealing with apples and apples in terms of volume. The attack on this unit is a little bit counterintuitive. To the right is faster, to the left is slower. You can change your ratios by clicking here. That's the 1176 mostly. Let's look at an LA2A clone. This one, you're raising, this to meet the threshold, so peak reduction. You can have your gain adjustments. This changes the meter. And the compressor changes, compressor versus limiting. This is a fixed ratio. So limiting is essentially a really high ratio, like 20:1, while compression might be 4. I don't know what this is set to be honest. There you go. Quick compression.